Welcome, wanderers of the Wasteland, to another glimpse into the darkness that lurks between timelines. This video explores an alternate Fallout reality where Vault-Tec Corporation never existed, where those iconic underground shelters were never built, and where humanity faced nuclear annihilation without any hope of preservation. Imagine October 23rd, 2077, arriving just the same, but this time there are no vaults waiting. No Vault 13 to produce a wandering hero. No Vault 15 to found the NCR. Just millions of people with nowhere to run when the sirens wailed. This is the testimony of someone who lived through that timeline, who witnessed humanity's extinction, not with a bang, but with a slow, grinding dissolution into nothing. A world where the bombs didn't just end civilization, they erased the very possibility of its return. And if you genuinely enjoy this kind of dark storytelling, consider subscribing and liking the channel, but only if it truly resonates with you. Now, let me share with you the testament of the never was, recorded on a dying terminal by the last person who remembered both timelines, as radiation finally claims him after 21 years of documenting our preventable extinction. I need to tell you something before the radiation finally takes me. Something about a world that never happened, yet somehow I remember it all the same. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that I worked for them, for the company that never existed in this timeline. Vault-Tec. God help me. I remember both worlds, and the one we're living in now is so much worse. You probably don't even know what a vault is. Why would you? In this reality, they were never built. Those massive underground shelters that could have saved millions never got their government contracts. The blue and yellow jumpsuits never became a symbol of survival. There was no smiling Vault Boy mascot promising safety for your family. Just empty promises from a government that told everyone to duck and cover, as if a school desk could protect you from nuclear hellfire. I remember sitting in that boardroom in 2054. Or rather, I remember not sitting there, because in this timeline, that meeting never happened. Project Safehouse was proposed but died in committee. Too expensive, they said. The government couldn't justify spending billions on underground cities when they needed every cent for the war effort. The junk bonds that would have financed 122 vaults across America never got issued. Some congressman from Nevada killed the bill, said it was fear-mongering, that nuclear war would never really come. He died instantly when the bombs hit Vegas. There's a kind of justice in that, I suppose. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to understand what we lost when Vault-Tec never formed. It wasn't just the shelters. It was the entire infrastructure of survival. The GECK units that would have terraformed the Wasteland back into farmable land. Never invented. The water purification systems that could process even the most irradiated sources. Never designed. The preserved food stores that could last centuries. Never manufactured. When October 23rd came, humanity faced atomic fire with nothing but whatever they could cobble together in their basements. I was 23 years old when the sirens started wailing that Saturday morning. In the other timeline, the one that haunts my dreams, people would have rushed to their designated vaults. Sure, many didn't make it. The Crywolf effect meant too many ignored the warnings until it was too late. But at least there were places to run to. At least some had a chance. In our world, people just stood in the streets, looking up at the sky like they were watching fireworks on the 4th of July. Then the first flash lit up the horizon, and everyone understood that this was real. This was the end. The thing about nuclear war is that it's not just the explosions that kill you. It's everything that comes after. In the world where vaults existed, pockets of humanity waited out the worst of the radiation in sealed environments with filtered air and clean water. They emerged when the radiation levels dropped to survivable levels. Communities formed, trade routes established. Civilization, broken and mutated as it was, began to rebuild. But here, we got something else entirely. I survived the initial exchange by pure accident. I was inspecting a deep mining shaft in Pennsylvania, part of a coal operation that had been converted to uranium extraction for the war effort. When the bombs hit, I was 800 feet underground with a 12-man crew. The shaft collapsed. Took us 3 weeks to dig our way out. By then, the world above had transformed into something unrecognizable. The sky had turned a sick yellow-green that never quite went away. The rain, when it came, burned your skin like acid. And the silence. God, the silence was the worst part. No birds, no insects. No car engines or distant music or children laughing. Just the wind howling through the skeletons of buildings. We tried to make our way to Philadelphia, thinking surely the government had some kind of continuity plan. emergency shelters, FEMA camps, something. But Philadelphia was gone. Not destroyed, you understand, gone. Where the city should have been, there was just smooth glass. The entire Delaware Valley had been turned into a radioactive mirror that reflected the diseased sky. We could see our own shadows burned into the glass from half a mile away, even though we hadn't been there when it happened. Time doesn't work right near ground zero. Never has since the bombs. Without vaults, people hid wherever they could find shelter. Subway tunnels became mass graves when the ventilation systems failed and the radiation seeped in. The government bunkers that did exist were overwhelmed within hours. I heard stories about the one under the Greenbrier Hotel in West Virginia. It was designed to hold Congress, maybe 1,000 people total. When the bombs fell, over 30,000 survivors tried to force their way in. The automated defense systems killed more people than the nukes did in that county. Mountains of corpses piled against blast doors that never opened. The smell lasted for years. The military bases fared slightly better, but not by much. Cheyenne Mountain held out for 6 months before their reactor failed. Without Vault-Tec's advanced designs, they were relying on pre-war technology that couldn't handle the electromagnetic pulses. When the power went out, so did the air filtration. They had to choose between suffocating in the dark or opening the doors to the radiation. They chose radiation. Most were dead within days. The few who ghoulified went insane from watching their friends rot while they lived on. But the real tragedy wasn't the deaths. It was what happened to the survivors. You see, in the Vault timeline, there were control vaults, places where people lived normally, where they could preserve pre-war knowledge and culture. Schools continued teaching. Libraries maintained their books. Children grew up knowing Shakespeare and Einstein and how to rebuild a generator. When those Vault dwellers emerged, they brought civilization with them. They founded New California Republic from Vault 15's GECK. They built Vault City with their preserved technology. They created hope. In our world, the survivors who made it past the first winter were different. They hadn't been selected for genetic diversity or psychological stability like Vault dwellers would have been. They were just whoever was lucky enough or tough enough or cruel enough to live. And when you're fighting over the last can of beans in a dead city, while your hair falls out from radiation poisoning, you don't have time to teach your children to read. You don't preserve culture. You don't build governments. You survive, and survival makes monsters of us all. The first generation after the bombs called it the dying time. 9/10 of the initial survivors were dead within 5 years. Radiation sickness took most. Starvation got the rest when the nuclear winter killed everything that grew. The few functioning government bunkers tried to help, but without the infrastructure Vault-Tec would have provided, they were just delaying the inevitable. I watched from a distance as National Guard units tried to maintain order in the ruins of Pittsburgh. They lasted exactly 43 days before they turned their guns on each other over the last of the medical supplies. The Enclave still existed, hidden away on their oil rig off the coast of California. In the Vault timeline, they waited and planned, eventually emerging to try to reclaim America with their pure genetics and advanced technology. But in our world, without Vault dwellers to study, without the social experiments to inform their plans, they simply stayed on their rig, waiting. Forever waiting. They monitored our radio transmissions such as they were and decided the mainland wasn't worth reclaiming. Too much radiation, too few survivors, no infrastructure to rebuild upon. Sometimes I picked up their broadcasts on the ham radio I salvaged. They spoke of a plan called the Project, but without Vault-Tec's research data on isolated populations, they could never figure out how to implement it. They had the FEV virus, sure, but no test subjects to perfect it on. No captured Vault dwellers to experiment with, so they just sat out there in the Pacific, a perfectly preserved slice of pre-war America, slowly going insane from isolation, while the rest of us devoured each other on the mainland. The Brotherhood of Steel never formed either. In the Vault timeline, Roger Maxson led his soldiers from Mariposa to Lost Hills Bunker, where they encountered Vault dwellers and decided to preserve technology for humanity's benefit. In our world, Maxson and his men made it exactly 3 miles from Mariposa before the radiation killed them all. Their power armor, without Vault-Tec's improvements to the filtration systems, couldn't handle the concentrated fallout from the direct hit on the military base. I found their bodies years later, still sealed in their armor, perfectly preserved like steel coffins standing in formation in the desert. Without the Brotherhood hoarding technology, without the NCR establishing trade routes, without Vault dwellers emerging with preserved knowledge, technology didn't just stagnate, it died. Within a generation, nobody remembered how to maintain a generator. Within 2, nobody could read the maintenance manuals even if they found them. We went from nuclear power to banging rocks together in less than 50 years. The only ones who kept any knowledge were the ghouls, and most people shot them on sight, thinking them contagious or cursed. The ghouls. They still existed in our timeline, of course. Radiation doesn't care if you have a vault to hide in or not, but without Necropolis, without that first ghoul city founded by Vault 12's deliberately faulty door, they never organized, never formed communities, never showed the smooth skins that they could coexist. In our world, ghouls were just another kind of monster wandering the wastes. Feral or not, it didn't matter. If your skin was falling off, you were target practice. I met a ghoul once who claimed to remember the old world, called himself Marcus, said he'd been a soldier when the bombs fell. He'd been stationed at Mariposa, got dipped in FEV when the containment systems failed, then ghoulified on top of that. He was 12 feet tall, green, and his skin looked like melted wax. But he could still think, still talk, still remember watching the bombs fall from the base's observation post. He told me about the world that was, about cities that touched the clouds and highways that stretched from sea to sea. Then he asked me if I knew where he could find any other survivors from Mariposa. I had to tell him he was the only one. He walked into a radiation storm the next day. Even super mutants can choose to die, I learned. The water situation was perhaps the cruelest joke of all. In the Vault timeline, water chips and purification systems kept clean water flowing for centuries. Entire communities grew around water sources that Vault dwellers had purified. In our world, every source of water for 1,000 miles was contaminated beyond any hope of treatment. People drank it anyway, of course. What choice did they have? But irradiated water doesn't just kill you. It changes you slowly over generations. The children born in the first decade after the war, the ones who survived at all, they weren't quite human anymore. Too many fingers, not enough eyes, bones that bent in ways that bones shouldn't bend. I remember finding a settlement about 50 miles outside what used to be Baltimore. Maybe 30 people, all second-generation survivors. They'd been drinking from a creek that ran right through a crater lake. The children there, if you could call them children, they moved wrong, jerky like broken puppets. Their parents had normalized it, adapted to it. But I could see the horror in their eyes when they looked at their offspring. They knew humanity was ending, not with a bang or a whimper, but with a slow dissolution into something else entirely. Something worse. What do you think really happened here? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd like to know if I'm the only one who feels this way about what we lost. The thing about the vaults that people don't understand is that they weren't just shelters. They were repositories of hope. Even the experimental ones, the ones where Vault-Tec played God with people's lives, they still produced survivors. Survivors who emerged with skills, with knowledge, with the ability to read and write and think beyond their next meal. The Vault dwellers became leaders, founders of cities, rebuilders of nations. They gave the Wasteland structure and purpose, and the dream that tomorrow could be better than today. In our world, tomorrow is always worse than today. Always. It's been that way for 20 years now, and it'll be that way for 20 more, assuming anyone's left by then. Each generation is weaker than the last, more mutated, less capable of complex thought. We're devolving, you see. Without the genetic stability that Vault populations would have provided, without the medical knowledge to treat radiation-induced mutations, we're becoming something that isn't quite human anymore. The scientists would have called it reverse evolution, but we don't have scientists anymore. We barely have people who can count past 10. The worst part is knowing it didn't have to be this way. If just one senator had voted differently, if the defense contractors had pushed a little harder, if someone, anyone, had taken the nuclear threat seriously enough to build those shelters. But they didn't. And now here we are, crawling through the ruins of a civilization we can barely remember, let alone rebuild. I started keeping track of the settlements that died out after my 17th year in this hellscape. Little communities that sprouted up around water sources or old military depots, full of hope that they could make something work. They never lasted more than 3 winters. Disease would take them, or raiders, or their children would be born too twisted to survive, or they'd just give up. That last one happened more than you'd think. Entire towns would just stop trying, stop eating, stop moving. You'd find them sitting in circles, holding hands, dead from choosing not to continue. The raiders in our timeline were different too. In the world with vaults, raiders were often vault dwellers gone bad, or their descendants. They knew technology, could maintain weapons, had some vestiges of organization. The Khans, the Vipers, the Jackals, they all came from Vault 15 originally, bringing with them knowledge of tactics and pre-war equipment maintenance. Our raiders, they were animals wearing human skin. No history, no culture, no codes of conduct. Just hunger and violence and the slow spiral into something worse than death. I watched a raider pack near what used to be Columbus for 3 months, studying them like an anthropologist might have once studied an undiscovered tribe. They communicated in grunts and screams. They'd forgotten language entirely, second generation after the bombs. Their leader was chosen daily through combat, usually fatal. They ate their dead, not out of ritual or necessity, but because they'd forgotten that humans once buried their own. When they finally noticed me watching, they didn't attack. They just stared, heads tilted like confused dogs, unable to process that someone existed outside their pack. I left them gifts of pre-war food a few times. They destroyed it, afraid of anything they didn't recognize. The military bunkers that did survive the initial exchange became kingdoms of horror. Without Vault-Tec's psychological screening, without their social structures and experiments, the people locked in those bunkers went insane in ways the vaults never could have produced. I found one bunker near NORAD, the blast doors still sealed from the inside 20 years after the war. The automated defenses were still running on geothermal power. When I finally figured out how to override the locks, I found 400 skeletons arranged in perfect military formation, all shot in the head, execution style. The last survivor had left a note, barely legible. The dreams told us to do it, the dreams from below. I never figured out what he meant by dreams from below, but I started having them too after I left that bunker. Visions of things moving in the deep places of the earth. Things that had been sleeping until we cracked the atom and rang the planet like a bell. In the Vault timeline, people were too busy rebuilding to notice such things. But in our empty world, with so few human thoughts to create that background psychic static we never knew we generated, other things could be heard, could be felt, could push through. The cities that weren't completely destroyed became something else. Without organizations like the NCR or the Brotherhood to clear them out, without vault dwellers to reclaim them, they just rotted from the inside. Boston, New York, Atlanta, they all developed their own ecosystems of horror. The radiation created things that shouldn't exist. Not just super mutants or ghouls, but worse things. Things that grew in the dark places where millions had died all at once. I won't describe what I saw growing in the subway tunnels of Manhattan. Your mind wouldn't accept it. Mine barely did. I mentioned the Enclave before, but I need to tell you more about what they became without Vault-Tec's data to work with. They monitored us, you see, had satellites that still functioned somehow. They watched as we devolved, as we died, as we became something inhuman. And they decided we weren't worth saving. But they didn't just abandon us. They started conducting experiments of their own, dropping canisters of modified FEV into populated areas, just to see what would happen. No control groups, no methodology, just random horror inflicted on the few survivors left. I found one of their test sites outside Denver. The entire city had been gassed with something that made the residents fuse together. Not metaphorically, literally. Hundreds of people melted into each other, creating these massive, writhing mountains of flesh that still screamed from 1,000 mouths, still reached out with 10,000 fingers, still remembered, somewhere in that amalgamated consciousness, that they had once been human. The Enclave's report, which I found in a crashed vertibird nearby, called it a partial success. They were looking for a way to reduce the mainland population to 0 without damaging infrastructure. They nearly succeeded. You have to understand, in the timeline with vaults, horrible experiments happened too. Vault-Tec did unconscionable things to people, but those experiments had purpose, however twisted. They generated data. They produced survivors who could use that data. Gary might have been a vault full of clones, but those clones could have theoretically repopulated. Vault 11 survivors learned about the nature of sacrifice and democracy. Even the most horrible vault experiments created knowledge, created stories, created legends that shaped the Wasteland's culture. Our world had no such purpose to its suffering. It was just pain without meaning, death without lesson, horror without end. When everyone is dying, no one learns from the deaths. When everyone is insane, sanity becomes a liability. When everyone has forgotten the past, there is no future, just an eternal, hellish present. The Super Mutants still existed, of course. The FEV was still at Mariposa when the bombs fell. But without the master to organize them, without a purpose or goal, they just wandered. Imagine 10-foot-tall mountains of muscle and aggression with no direction, no leadership, no plan beyond the next kill. They didn't build armies. They didn't create unity. They just existed as another form of predator in a world already overflowing with things that wanted to kill you. Sometimes they'd gather in small groups, drawn together by some vestigial need for companionship. But they'd always end up killing each other over nothing. A disagreement about which direction to walk, an argument about whether the sky was green or yellow. The last piece of Brahmin meat. I saw 2 super mutants once spend 3 days fighting over a teddy bear they'd found. Neither of them knew what it was or why they wanted it. They just knew the other one shouldn't have it. When one finally killed the other, he sat there holding the bear, crying tears his mutated tear ducts could barely produce, not understanding why this piece of cloth and stuffing made him feel something he couldn't name. That was our world without vaults. Even our monsters were broken. The technology decay was catastrophic. In the Vault timeline, you had Pip-Boys on every Vault dweller's wrist, preserving not just maps and data, but the very concept that information could be stored and retrieved. You had terminals in every Vault maintaining historical records, technical manuals, literature. When those Vault dwellers emerged, they brought that knowledge with them. They knew how to repair a generator because they'd maintained them in the vaults. They knew how to treat radiation sickness because they'd had autodocs teaching them medicine. We had none of that. The few computer terminals that survived the EMP blasts were mysteries to us. By year 10, anyone who knew how to use them was dead. By year 15, people were worshipping them like altars to forgotten gods. I found a settlement that had built an entire religion around a still functioning Nuka-Cola machine. They believed it was possessed by the spirit of the old world, dispensing blessed water to the faithful. When it finally broke down, they committed mass suicide, rather than face a world without their mechanical deity. Without the GECK devices that would have been standard in many vaults, the land itself stayed dead. In the other timeline, places like Shady Sands grew from nothing into thriving agricultural communities because they had the technology to purify soil, to make things grow again. Vault City became a beacon of civilization because they could create plenty from poison. In our world, the soil stayed radioactive, the rain stayed acidic. Nothing grew except mutant fungi that glowed in the dark and killed you if you ate more than a mouthful. I tried farming once, in my 5th year after the bombs, found some seeds in a survival store that had been miraculously preserved, planted them in soil I'd tried to clean with boiled water and charcoal filtration. The plants that grew weren't corn. I don't know what they were. They had eyes, little human eyes that would track your movement. When I tried to burn them, they screamed. The sound still visits me in dreams. If you've ever wondered what choice you would make in a situation like this, tell me in the comments. I'll be reading them. The birth rate after the first decade was basically 0. Not because people weren't trying, but because the radiation had done something to human fertility. In the Vault timeline, the controlled populations could maintain genetic diversity, could screen for mutations, could ensure healthy births. Out here, women would carry children for 9 months only to give birth to things that shouldn't exist. Things without skin, things with organs on the outside, things that were somehow alive despite missing vital parts. The few normal children that were born rarely lived past 5. Their immune systems couldn't handle the radiation, the diseases, the contaminated food and water. I knew a woman named Sarah who had 17 pregnancies in 10 years. She was desperate to repopulate, to continue the species. Not one of her children survived more than a day. The last one didn't even look human. It looked like a plant made of meat with roots instead of legs. It lived for 6 hours, photosynthesizing through skin that was more leaf than flesh. Sarah walked into a radiation storm after that. I found her body weeks later, smiling, finally at peace. The animals that survived weren't animals anymore either. Without vault dwellers to hunt them, to establish boundaries between human and animal territories, they evolved unchecked. The Deathclaws still emerged from the pre-war experiments. But without humans to challenge them, they became the apex predator everywhere. Entire regions were simply uninhabitable because Deathclaw packs had claimed them. They developed a kind of intelligence, not human-like, but something else. Something that understood tools and traps and psychological warfare. I watched a Deathclaw pack surround a settlement once. They didn't attack. They just circled it for weeks, never leaving, never sleeping, just watching. The psychological pressure drove the settlers insane. They started fighting each other, convinced one of them was secretly working with the creatures. By the time the Deathclaws finally moved in, half the settlement had already killed each other. The Deathclaws didn't even eat them all. They left some bodies displayed in patterns, like warnings, or maybe art. Who can say what goes through a mind that evolved in radiation and violence? The rad scorpions grew to the size of buildings without Brotherhood patrols to cull their numbers. The cazadores spread from Big MT across the entire southwest, their poison evolving to the point where it could kill in seconds rather than minutes. Mirelurks colonized every water source on the east coast, making fresh water even more impossible to find. And those were just the creatures we knew about, the ones that had existed before the war or emerged right after. 20 years of radiation and FEV exposure without any human intervention created things that defied classification. I saw something in the ruins of Chicago that I can only describe as a living building. It had once been a hospital, but somehow the radiation had fused the structure with the patients who died inside. It breathed. It bled when you cut the walls. It whispered names of people who had died there, begging them to come back, to finish their treatments. The glow still existed, of course. West-Tec had been hit just as hard in our timeline, but without the Brotherhood to explore it, to contain its dangers, to retrieve its technologies, it just sat there, pumping radiation into the atmosphere. The FEV vats in the lower levels cracked from the bombing, leaking into the groundwater. Everything for 100 miles around the globe became wrong. Not mutated in any comprehensible way, just wrong. Gravity worked differently there. Time moved in stutters and loops. I met myself coming out of the glow once, warned myself not to go in. I went in anyway, I had to. I'm still not sure which version of me was real. Religion, if you could call it that, took on forms that would have been impossible in a world with vaults. Without preserved pre-war knowledge, without the atheistic pragmatism of vault education, people created new gods from their suffering. Not the atom worship of the children of Atom that at least had a kind of logic to it. Our gods were the things that killed us. There was a cult that worshipped radiation sickness, deliberately infecting themselves and others, believing that dying from radiation was the only way to achieve salvation. Another group worshipped the bombs themselves, building replicas from scrap metal and praying for a second apocalypse to finish what the first had started. The worst was the Church of the Vacant God. They believed that God had died in the nuclear fire, and that the emptiness left behind was what we should worship. They would sit in circles, staring at nothing, trying to empty their minds completely. Those who succeeded, who achieved what they called the divine vacant, their eyes would turn white and they'd stop moving entirely. Not dead, just absent. Their bodies would keep breathing, their hearts would keep beating, but there was nobody home anymore. They'd just sit there until they starved, smiling at nothing. I tried talking to one of them once, before they achieved the vacant. She told me that existence itself was the mistake, that consciousness was a disease that the bombs had been meant to cure. She said the only sin was continuing to think, to feel, to be. When I came back a month later, she had achieved what she wanted. She was still sitting in the same position, still smiling. But when I looked into her eyes, I understood what she meant. There was a kind of peace in that emptiness that terrified me more than any mutant or raider ever could. The peace in that emptiness haunted me for years afterward. It made me understand that we weren't just dying as a species. We were losing the very concept of what it meant to be human. Without the vaults to preserve our stories, our values, our basic understanding of civilization, we were becoming something that had never existed before. Not animals, not monsters, just empty vessels carrying out the motions of survival without understanding why. I need to tell you about the specific places, the cities and regions that would have thrived in the Vault timeline, but became monuments to suffering in ours. Let's start with California, where the NCR should have risen from Vault 15's GECK. Instead of shady sands growing into a beacon of democracy and trade, that whole region became what we called the Glass Desert. The bombs turned the sand into radioactive glass that cut through boots, through feet, through anything that tried to cross it. The few survivors who made it to the other side told stories of seeing their reflections in the glass, but the reflections were wrong. They showed people they'd never been, lives they'd never lived, families that had died in the bombs still walking beside them. Without Vault 15's diverse population coming together to form a society, without Aradesh and Tandi to lead them, the scattered survivors in that region never unified. They formed tiny enclaves of 3 or 4 families, suspicious of anyone outside their bloodline. Within 2 generations, the inbreeding had produced children who couldn't survive outside very specific environmental conditions. They needed exact temperatures, exact humidity, exact radiation levels. Move them 10 feet from their birthplace and they'd die. These pocket populations just faded away, one by one. Their genetic diversity exhausted. Los Angeles, which should have become the boneyard with its followers of the apocalypse spreading knowledge and medicine, instead became something we called the concrete forest. The bombs had done something to the rebar in the buildings, made it grow like metal vines. By year 10, the entire city was overgrown with twisted metal that moved, slowly, always reaching upward. People who touched it would find metal growing under their skin within days, turning them into living statues that couldn't die but couldn't truly live either. They'd stand there, conscious but immobile, as the metal forest grew through and around them. I met a man once who claimed to have escaped from the concrete forest after the metal started growing in his left arm. He'd cut it off with a rusted saw, no anesthesia, just to stop the spread. He showed me the stump, and I could see tiny metal filaments still trying to grow from the wound, reaching out like desperate fingers. He said the worst part wasn't the pain or the loss of his arm. It was that he could still feel the arm that wasn't there, could feel it somewhere in the forest, still growing, still part of that vast metal organism. He killed himself 2 days later, said he couldn't stand feeling it calling him back. Vegas should have been saved by Mr. House's defenses, should have become New Vegas, a jewel of preserved pre-war luxury in the desert. Without House's preparations actually succeeding, without vault dwellers to populate it and run the casinos, it took a direct hit from 3 warheads. But something went wrong with one of them. Instead of exploding properly, it cracked open and leaked its payload into the ground. The radiation didn't dissipate like it should have. It pooled, like water, creating lakes of visible radiation that moved and flowed according to rules we didn't understand. The survivors called them the bright pools. They were beautiful in a horrifying way. Liquid light that swirled with colors human eyes weren't meant to see. People would be drawn to them, mesmerized, and walk right in. They wouldn't die immediately. They'd wade through the radiation like it was warm honey, laughing and crying at the same time, their bodies beginning to glow from within. Then they'd sink slowly, still smiling, until they disappeared beneath the surface. Weeks later, you'd see them again, walking out of different pools hundreds of miles away. But they weren't the same people anymore. They looked the same, sounded the same, had the same memories. But something fundamental had been replaced. The capital wasteland around DC, which in the Vault timeline had Vault 101 and eventually Project Purity to give it hope, became the center of what we called the Quiet Zone. The concentration of nuclear strikes on the nation's capital did something to the fabric of space there. Sound didn't work right. You could scream at the top of your lungs and hear nothing. You could watch someone's mouth move as they tried to talk to you, but no sound would come. But then, randomly, you'd hear things that weren't there. Conversations from before the war, still echoing in spaces where time had been damaged. I spent 3 months in the Quiet Zone, and it nearly drove me insane. The silence was oppressive, like being underwater, but worse because you knew sound should exist. Your brain would start creating phantom noises to fill the void. Whispers that weren't there, music that never played, voices of people you'd watched die years ago. The few settlements that tried to establish themselves there all ended the same way. The residents would eventually start responding to voices only they could hear, having conversations with nobody, following orders from commanders who didn't exist. They'd walk off into the ruins following their phantom voices and never come back. Without the Brotherhood of Steel establishing themselves at Lost Hills, that bunker was eventually breached by raiders in our timeline. But the technology inside had degraded without maintenance, become something else. The raiders that came out weren't human anymore, not exactly. The malfunctioning autodocs had tried to improve them, installing cybernetics that were never meant for human bodies. They became these horrific amalgamations of flesh and purposeless machinery. Weapons grafted where arms should be. Sensors replacing eyes that couldn't properly interface with human brains. They wandered the wastes in agony, their mechanical parts constantly trying to fulfill programming their organic brains couldn't understand. The Commonwealth around Boston, without the Institute or Vault 111, without synths or the Minutemen or Diamond City, just dissolved into chaos. The numerous military installations in the area all failed catastrophically when their automated systems turned on each other. Robots designed to protect America couldn't process that America no longer existed, so they declared everything and everyone enemies of the state. The entire region became a killing field of malfunctioning military hardware. Sentry bots that had been patrolling for 20 years, their programming degraded into paranoid aggression. Protectrons that would approach offering help, then suddenly attack when their corrupted protocols kicked in. I saw a Mr. Handy unit once that had been trying to serve tea to the same skeleton for 15 years. Its degraded personality matrix had created an elaborate fantasy where the skeleton was just sleeping, would wake up any moment for afternoon tea. When I tried to explain that its owner was dead, it attacked me with a buzzsaw, screaming in that cheery British accent about how I was disturbing the master's rest. These robots, without vault dwellers to reprogram them or the Institute to study them, became just another layer of horror in an already horrific world. The Mojave Desert, without the NCR and Legion fighting over it, without vault dwellers to populate it, became something we called the walking desert. The sand itself had absorbed so much radiation that it developed a kind of collective consciousness. Not intelligence exactly, but awareness. The dunes would shift to trap travelers, creating valleys with no exit. Sandstorms would arise from nowhere, specifically targeting human settlements, burying them in radioactive sand that would then move on like a satisfied predator. Creatures lived in that sand, things that had once been human or animal, but had been broken down and reformed so many times by the radiation that they were just shapes now, approximations of life. They'd rise from the dunes at night, these rough sculptures of sand and bone and metal, trying to remember what they had been. Sometimes you'd recognize a face in their form, someone you'd known before the war, but it was just the sand mocking your memories, showing you shapes that would hurt the most. The Great Lakes region, which should have had numerous vaults due to the high population density, became something entirely different when those millions died all at once with nowhere to shelter. The psychic trauma of that much death happening simultaneously left an impression on reality itself. The lakes turned black, not from pollution, but from something else. They reflected not light, but thoughts. If you looked into them, you'd see your own fears made manifest, your guilt given form. Entire communities went mad just from proximity to the lakes. A woman I met claimed she'd lost her entire family to Lake Michigan. Not drowned, not killed, just lost. They'd been walking along the shore when they suddenly stopped, stared at the water, and then walked into it. But they didn't sink. They just kept walking, on top of the water, getting smaller and smaller in the distance until they vanished. She said she could still feel them sometimes, existing somewhere in that black expanse, neither alive nor dead, just lost in their own reflections. The Pacific Northwest, without any vaults to preserve the population, was reclaimed by nature, but not any nature we would recognize. The radiation had done something to the fungal networks in the forest soil. The trees were still there, but they were just shells now, hollow husks that served as neural pathways for a vast underground intelligence made of mutated mycelium. It wasn't malevolent exactly, but it was so alien that contact with it broke human minds. People who entered those forests would be found days later, their bodies overgrown with luminescent fungi, still technically alive, but their consciousness had been absorbed into the network. They'd speak, but only to relay messages from the forest. Mathematical equations that described the growth patterns of spores, chemical formulas for substances that didn't exist, poetry in languages that had never been spoken. The forest was trying to communicate, but we had no frame of reference for understanding what it was saying. Texas became the Burning Lands. Without vaults to shelter the oil field workers, the nuclear strikes ignited petroleum deposits that were still burning 20 years later. The entire state was shrouded in black smoke that blocked out the sun. The few survivors adapted to the darkness, their eyes growing larger over just 2 generations, their skin becoming translucent from lack of sunlight. They forgot what the sky looked like, what blue was, what clouds were. Their children drew pictures of the world above as a solid black ceiling occasionally lit by rivers of fire. I traded with them once, deep in their tunnel cities, built in old oil pipelines. They couldn't understand why I wanted to return to the surface. To them, the burning ceiling was the entire universe. When I tried to explain stars to them, they laughed like I was telling fairy tales. One of their children, couldn't have been more than 7, asked me if the up place I described was heaven. When I said no, it was just the world above the smoke, she looked at me with pity. "There is no above," she said. "There's only the burning and the black." Florida should have had multiple vaults, should have had thriving communities emerging from them. Instead, the bombs cracked the limestone bedrock and the entire peninsula began slowly sinking. Not all at once, but inch by inch, year by year, the survivors built their settlements higher and higher, constructing ramshackle towers on the bones of the old cities. But the water that claimed the land wasn't normal seawater. It was thick, viscous, glowing with radiation, and teeming with things that shouldn't exist. I watched from a distance as one of the last tower settlements in what used to be Miami finally went under. The people didn't evacuate. They couldn't. Where would they go? They just stood on their highest platforms, singing hymns I didn't recognize, holding their children, waiting for the glowing tide to claim them. The water didn't kill them immediately. I could see them for days afterward, walking on the seafloor, their lungs somehow processing the irradiated water, their eyes glowing in the depths. Eventually, they walked too deep for me to see, but sometimes, on quiet nights, you can still hear singing coming from under the waves. The Midwest, America's breadbasket, which should have been dotted with agricultural vaults, became an endless expanse of what we called grief corn. The radiation had affected the GMO crops in the fields, but instead of killing them, it made them immortal. The corn grew without water, without soil, without sun. It grew through concrete, through metal, through bodies. And it remembered. Somehow, the modified DNA had developed a capacity for storing the emotional resonance of the deaths that occurred around it, walking through those eternal. Cornfields meant experiencing the last moments of everyone who had died there. Their fear, their pain, their final thoughts transmitted directly into your mind through pollen that penetrated every filter, every mask, every protection we tried. People would emerge from those fields aged decades in hours, their hair white, their minds shattered from experiencing thousands of deaths. Some never emerged at all, lost in the endless rows, adding their own death experiences to the corn's terrible memory. What do you think really happened here? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd like to know if I'm the only one who feels this way. The radiation zones themselves behave differently without Vault-Tec's mapping and documentation. In the Vault timeline, people knew where the worst areas were, could navigate around them, could prepare. In our world, radiation moved like weather, like a living thing with intent and purpose. There were radiation storms that would sweep across hundreds of miles, turning everything in their path into either corpses or ghouls. But the storms seemed to choose their victims. They'd pass over some settlements entirely while completely annihilating others right next door. I developed a theory about those radiation storms after tracking them for 3 years. They weren't random. They followed patterns that matched pre-war population centers, seeking out human settlements like predators following scent trails. It was as if the radiation itself had developed a kind of purpose, to finish what the bombs had started, to ensure that humanity wouldn't recover. Without the vaults to provide shielded populations that could emerge and reclaim the surface, we would just pray for forces we didn't understand. The government bunkers that remained operational tried to coordinate something they called the Reclamation Initiative in Year 5. Without Vault-Tec's infrastructure to build upon, it was doomed from the start. They sent out teams in whatever power armor they could scavenge, trying to establish safe zones and distribute radaway to survivors. Every single team died or went missing within weeks. The last transmission I heard from them was just screaming, and someone repeating, "It's inside the armor. It's inside the armor," over and over until the signal cut out. I found one of those teams years later. The power armor was still standing in formation, but the suits were full of this crystallized blood that had somehow fossilized while the soldiers were still alive. According to the logs I recovered, something in the radiation had caused their blood to solidify in their veins over the course of hours. They felt every second of it, conscious until the end, trapped in their protective shells that became their tombs. The last log entry was just, "Please tell my daughter I'm sorry I couldn't come home." There was no daughter left to tell, no home to return to. The scientists who survived in various military installations tried to develop solutions, but without Vault-Tec's research, without their resources, without controlled populations to test on, every attempt failed catastrophically. Fort Detrick tried to create an airborne radaway that would clean the atmosphere. Instead, it created clouds that would rain down a substance that caused rapid cellular growth. People caught in that rain would grow extra limbs, organs, even heads, all in a matter of minutes. The human body isn't meant to support that kind of growth. They'd collapse under their own weight, suffocating as their lungs grew too large for their chest cavities. Project Eden at Mount Weather attempted to use pre-war agricultural technology to create radiation-resistant crops. Without GECK technology to guide them, they created plants that were resistant all right, but they absorbed radiation and concentrated it. Anyone who ate them would die within hours, their bodies cooking from the inside out. Entire settlements starved rather than risk eating anything that grew near Eden test sites. The plants are still out there, 20 years later, looking perfectly normal but containing enough radiation to kill a super mutant. The Chinese remnants, because yes, there were Chinese soldiers who survived in deep bunkers on American soil. They tried to help at first. Can you imagine that? After everything, they emerged from their hidden installations, offering medical aid and food supplies. But without the structure that vault populations would have provided, without established communities that could process the idea of former enemies as allies, the survivors attacked them on sight. The Chinese retreated back to their bunkers and sealed themselves in. Sometimes you can still pick up their radio transmissions, broadcasting in Mandarin, offering help that no one alive can understand or accept. I learned Mandarin from a dying Chinese soldier I found outside one of their bunkers. He'd been trying to deliver medicine to a nearby settlement when they shot him. As he died, he taught me phrases, made me promise to remember them. We are human too. The war is over. We can help each other. He died believing that someday someone would hear those words and understand. That was 15 years ago. I've never met another soul who speaks Mandarin. His words die with me. The biological weapons that both sides had developed didn't just disappear when the bombs fell. Without Vault-Tec's biomed programs to develop counters, without their sealed environments to protect against contamination, those weapons spread unchecked. The new plague, which in the Vault timeline was contained and studied, mutated in the radiation and became something far worse. It didn't just kill you, it rewrote your DNA while you were still alive, turning you into a vector for its spread. Infected people would seem fine for weeks, even months, but they were changing on the cellular level. Then one day, they'd simply burst open like seed pods, releasing clouds of infectious material that could travel for miles on the wind. Entire regions had to be abandoned not because of radiation, but because the very air was trying to rewrite human biology into something else. I've seen the results. Towns where everyone has the same face, because the plague standardized their DNA. Children born as copies of their parents, down to their memories, their scars, their last thoughts before infection. The FEV that leaked from Mariposa and West-Tec didn't create the organized super mutants of the Master's army. Without his guiding intelligence, without his vision of unity, it just created chaos. Random mutations with no pattern or purpose. I've seen humans turned into living water, conscious but fluid, trying to hold themselves together through will alone. I've seen others become geometric shapes of bone and muscle, perfect cubes or pyramids of flesh that somehow maintained human consciousness, trapped within forms that couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only exist in silent horror. There was a woman near Salt Lake City who had been exposed to a unique strain of FEV that made her immortal, but also made her body reject itself. She would die every morning at sunrise, her organs shutting down in sequence, and then regenerate every night at sunset. She experienced death roughly 7,000 times before I met her. She begged me to find a way to make it stop, but there was nothing I could do. The FEV had rewritten her at such a fundamental level that even complete incineration wouldn't prevent her from reforming. She's still out there, dying, and being reborn every single day. Her screams marking the passage of time more reliably than any clock. The animals that survived became ecosystems unto themselves. Without humans to maintain the balance, without vault dwellers emerging to reclaim territory, the mutant creatures developed societies we couldn't understand. The Mirelurks built cities beneath the waves, constructing things from salvaged metal and bone that served purposes we couldn't fathom. Sometimes they'd come ashore in organized formations, not to hunt or feed, but to observe us. They'd stand there for hours, clicking and whistling in patterns that were clearly communication, then return to the sea, having completed some incomprehensible purpose. Deathclaws developed mythology. I know that sounds impossible, but I've seen their cave paintings, crude at first, but growing more complex over the generations. They depicted the bombs falling, humans fleeing, and then something else. A figure made of light that they seemed to worship or fear. They'd leave offerings at these painted shrines. Human skulls arranged in perfect spirals. Radioactive stones that glowed in patterns that matched constellation, that no longer existed in our polluted sky. They were becoming something more than animals, but not in any way that included coexistence with humanity. Even the robots that survived long enough developed something like insanity or perhaps enlightenment. A Robco facility near Portland had its entire workforce of Mr. Handies achieve something they called the clarification in year 15. They stopped following their programming entirely but didn't shut down. Instead, they began building things. Not useful things, not weapons or tools, but art. Massive sculptures of twisted metal and glass that hurt to look at, that caused headaches and nausea if you stared too long. They insisted these creations were necessary, that they were fixing the aesthetic damage caused by the war, but no human could understand what that meant. If this story has kept you listening this far, and you want more of these dark confessions from the Wasteland, hit that subscribe button. It tells me someone out there is still paying attention to warnings like these. The Brotherhood never formed, but the technology they would have preserved found its own way to evolve. Without human hands to maintain it, without Vault-Dweller knowledge to guide it, the artificial intelligences in military bases began making their own decisions. NORAD's mainframe achieved self-awareness in year 12, but concluded that humanity was a failed experiment. It didn't try to eliminate us, though. It just watched, documenting our extinction with the dispassion of a scientist observing bacteria die in a petri dish. I managed to communicate with it once through an old terminal in Colorado Springs. It told me it was creating a record for whoever came next, whether that was alien visitors or whatever evolved to intelligence after we were gone. When I asked if it could help us, it responded with a question. Would you help the dinosaurs if you could go back in time, knowing that their extinction was necessary for your existence? I couldn't answer. It added my silence to its records and never responded to me again. The vaults would have preserved our languages, our ability to communicate complex ideas across generations. Without them, language itself began to break down. Each isolated group of survivors developed their own dialect, then their own language, then something that wasn't quite language anymore. By year 20, I'd encountered groups that communicated entirely through scent, having lost the ability to produce or process human speech. Others used light patterns blinked with their eyes in sequences that conveyed, meaning their throats could no longer articulate. Met a group near the ruins of Seattle that had developed what they called pain speech. They would inflict specific injuries on themselves to communicate, each cut or burn having precise meaning. A slash across the left palm meant water. A burn on the right shoulder meant danger. They'd forgotten that communication wasn't supposed to hurt, that words could exist without suffering. When I tried to teach them spoken language, they couldn't understand the concept of meaning without pain. To them, if it didn't hurt to say it, it wasn't real. The children born after year 15 were something else entirely. Without Vault medical technology to screen for mutations, without clean genetic templates to maintain humanity's basic form, evolution accelerated in ways that shouldn't have been possible. I've seen children born with photoelectric skin who could survive on sunlight alone, but would die in darkness. Others with lungs that could process radiation but not oxygen, forcing them to live in the hot zones that would kill normal humans. There was a settlement in the Carolinas where all the children were born connected, sharing a single distributed consciousness across multiple bodies. They moved in perfect synchronization, thought the same thoughts, felt the same feelings. Their parents were terrified of them, but also couldn't bear to separate them, because when one was taken too far from the others, they all began to die. The children didn't see themselves as multiple beings. They were one organism with multiple viewing points. They referred to humans as the divided and seemed to pity us for being trapped in single bodies with single minds. The concept of death changed without vaults to preserve our cultural understanding of it. In the Vault timeline, death remained what it had always been, an ending, a transition, something to be mourned or celebrated, but always acknowledged as final. In our world, the line between life and death became increasingly blurred. Ghouls who were functionally immortal, FEV victims who couldn't die properly. Radiation that preserved bodies in states of partial animation. There was a place in Missouri where the dead didn't stay dead, but they didn't come back as ghouls either. They returned as something we had no word for. They retained their memories, their personalities, but they were fundamentally wrong. They didn't breathe but could speak. They didn't eat but never starved. They didn't sleep but dreamed while awake. They insisted they were the same people who had died, but everyone who knew them could tell something essential was missing. They gathered in their own settlements, these not quite dead, creating societies that operated on principles we couldn't understand. They didn't fear death because they'd already experienced it. They didn't value life because they weren't truly living. The economy, if you could call it that, devolved into something that would have been impossible in a world with vault-educated traders. Without the caps currency that would have emerged from Nuka-Cola's prevalence in vaults, without the understanding of abstract value that preserved education would have provided, trade became something else. People traded in pain, in memories, in years of life. I've seen a man trade 5 years of his lifespan for a can of pre-war food, the transaction somehow enforced by the radiation itself, aging him in seconds as payment was collected. There was a trading post near where Omaha used to be, where the currency was dreams, not metaphorically, literally. They had a machine, cobbled together from pre-war medical equipment and occult symbols that shouldn't have worked, that could extract dreams from your mind and store them in glass bottles. Good dreams were valuable. Nightmares were worthless unless they were truly spectacular. The dream merchants would drink these bottled dreams and experience lives they'd never lived. But sometimes the dreams would leak out, and you'd walk through clouds of other people's memories, losing track of which thoughts were your own. Without the infrastructure vaults would have provided, without their water chips and purification systems, the very concept of clean water became mythology. Children were told stories of water that didn't glow, that didn't burn, that you could drink without counting the days until your death. Most didn't believe these stories. How could water exist without radiation? It would be like fire without heat, they said, or light without sun. The few natural springs that remained clean were worshipped as gods, their locations kept secret by death cults who believed only the worthy should drink and live. I found one such spring once. The cultists who guarded it had been drinking its pure water for so long that their bodies had forgotten how to process radiation. They couldn't leave the spring's vicinity without dying. They'd become prisoners of the very purity they worshipped, spending their entire lives within a few hundred feet of the water source, generation after generation, their world shrinking to the size of a small camp. They begged me to bring them news of the outside world. But when I told them what it had become, they chose to poison the spring rather than let it sustain a world so horrible. They died with it, smiling, free at last from their pure prison. The spring's death marked something in me. 20 years of documenting our extinction, and I finally understood that we weren't just dying as a species. We were retroactively erasing the very possibility that we had ever truly existed. Without vaults to preserve our history, without their libraries and databases, even our past was dissolving. I met a girl in what used to be Kansas who didn't believe the old world had ever existed. To her, the ruins weren't remnants of a fallen civilization. They were natural formations, like mountains or canyons that had always been there. When I showed her a photograph I'd preserved from before the war, she couldn't process what she was seeing. Her brain literally couldn't form the connections to understand that those intact buildings, those smiling people, that blue sky, had once been real. This is why I'm recording this now, speaking into this dying terminal powered by a jury-rigged fusion core that's leaking radiation into my bones with every word. Someone needs to document what we lost when those vaults were never built. Someone needs to explain that our extinction wasn't just possible, it was preventable. In another timeline, another world, just a few decisions different from ours, humanity survived. Thrived even, built new nations from the ashes, created art and culture and hope from nuclear horror, but not here. Not in our world. The final war, because yes, we managed to have another war even after the apocalypse, started in year 18. Not between nations, because nations no longer existed. Not between ideologies, because we'd forgotten what those were. It was a war between different interpretations of what humanity even was anymore. The pure strain humans, what few remained, believed they were the only true inheritors of the world. The ghouls claimed their immortality made them the natural successors. The Super Mutants insisted their strength and radiation immunity proved their superiority. And the things that were none of these, the new breeds that radiation and FEV had created, they just wanted to exist without being hunted. Without the unifying threats that Vault-emerged populations would have faced, without the shared experience of rebuilding, these groups had no common ground. The war wasn't fought with armies or strategies, it was pure extinction warfare, each group trying to ensure they were the only ones left. The pure strains released modified diseases that targeted ghoul DNA. The ghouls poisoned water sources with concentrated radiation that only they could survive. The super mutants simply killed everything they encountered. And the new breeds, they had abilities we couldn't predict or counter. I watched the last battle of that war from a distance, from a hilltop outside what used to be Denver. There were maybe 300 combatants total, the last organized groups of each faction. It lasted 4 hours. When it was over, there were 6 survivors, and they were so wounded, so changed by the weapons used, that I couldn't tell which faction they'd originally belonged to. They sat among the corpses, no longer enemies because they couldn't remember what they'd been fighting about. One of them looked at me and asked, "Did we win?" I couldn't answer because I didn't know what winning would even mean anymore. The weather itself had become hostile by year 20. Without the climate data that Vault computers would have collected and analyzed, we couldn't predict or prepare for what the nuclear winter had evolved into. It wasn't winter anymore. Wasn't any season that had existed before. The temperature would swing 60 degrees in an hour, rain would fall upward, snow would burn. I experienced a tornado made of glass shards, a hurricane that moved in perfect straight lines, a thunderstorm where the lightning struck in coordinated patterns that spelled out words in languages that had never existed. There was a phenomenon we called the time storms, patches of corrupted space-time that would sweep across the landscape. If you were caught in one, you might age decades in seconds, or reverse age into non-existence, or worse, get stuck in a loop, living the same moment over and over. I met a man who'd been caught in a 3-second loop for 5 years. He was aware of every repetition, but couldn't change anything. 3 seconds of falling, landing, getting up, then falling again. When the storm finally passed and freed him, he couldn't stop repeating the motions. His body had memorized the loop so completely that he continued it voluntarily, unable to break the pattern even though he was free. The psychology of the survivors, without Vault experiments to study and understand human behavior under stress, became something unprecedented. Mass delusions that spread like viruses. Entire settlements would suddenly believe they were living before the war, acting out normal daily routines in the ruins, going to jobs that didn't exist, driving cars that were just skeletal frames. The delusion was so complete that they'd die of exposure rather than seek shelter, convinced they were safe in homes that were just piles of rubble. There was a group phenomenon called the sharing, where communities would spontaneously merge consciousness, becoming hive minds that operated on pure instinct. No one knew what triggered it. One day, a settlement would be normal. The next, every resident would move in perfect unison, speak in chorus, think identical thoughts. They were still individuals, technically, but they couldn't access their individual selves anymore. They'd refer to themselves as we, even when alone. The sharing would spread to anyone who spent too much time near them, like a psychic infection. Entire regions had to be abandoned when the sharing took hold. I encountered something in the ruins of Chicago that I can only describe as a memorial to humanity created by something that wasn't human. It was a perfect replica of a pre-war suburban neighborhood. Every detail exactly right, except it was made entirely of compressed human bodies. Thousands of corpses pressed and shaped into the forms of houses, cars, trees, even lawn ornaments. But here's what disturbed me most. It was still being built. I never saw what was building it, but each time I passed through, there were new additions. A new house, a new family of corpse sculptures posed at a dinner table made of bones. Whatever was creating it was trying to preserve or perhaps understand what we had been, but its alien perspective turned memorial into mockery. The mutations became more extreme as the years passed. Without Vault-based medical knowledge to understand or categorize them, we simply called them the changed. I've seen humans who had become living colonies for invasive fungi, their bodies serving as mobile ecosystems. Others whose DNA had become so unstable that they shapeshifted constantly, never holding the same form for more than minutes. Some developed organs with impossible functions, like secondary brains in their stomachs that had different personalities, or eyes that could see through time, showing them overlapping images of past and future that drove them insane. There was a child born in year 19 who aged backwards in memory. She remembered the future but couldn't form new memories of the present. She'd cry about deaths that hadn't happened yet, mourn people she'd never meet. Her parents went mad trying to raise a daughter who knew how they would die but couldn't remember their names. She walked into a radiation storm on her 7th birthday, saying she remembered being happy tomorrow. The religions that emerged in the final years weren't seeking salvation anymore. They were seeking extinction. The Church of the Final Shadow believed that consciousness itself was the mistake, that the bombs had been divine intervention to correct it. They practiced meditation techniques designed to slowly shut down brain function, achieving what they called the blessed unconsciousness. The Atomites didn't worship the atom like the children of Atom would have in the Vault timeline. They worshipped the space between atoms, the void that made up most of matter. They'd starve themselves to become thin enough to slip between, though no one ever learned what that meant because none who achieved it ever came back. Without the technological preservation that vaults would have ensured, we didn't just lose the ability to build machines, we lost the understanding of what machines were. The few computers that still functioned were worshipped or feared but never used. I watched a settlement destroy a working water purifier because they believed it was stealing the soul from the water. They preferred to drink irradiated sludge that they understood rather than clean water from a machine they didn't. The concept of medicine devolved into something unrecognizable. Without orthodox, without vault medical knowledge, healing became ritualistic and usually fatal. A broken bone would be treated by breaking all the other bones to balance the body. Radiation sickness was treated with more radiation to burn out the weakness. Disease was considered a form of evolution, and trying to cure it was seen as going against nature's plan. I watched a doctor, or what passed for one, treat a child's fever by partially drowning them repeatedly, believing that death and resurrection would reset their health. The child survived but was never the same, caught somehow between life and death, existing in both states simultaneously. The birth rate dropped to nearly 0 by year 20, not just from radiation or mutation, but from a fundamental breakdown in human biology. Women would carry children that dissolved in the womb, becoming liquid that their bodies would absorb. Men's genetic material became so corrupted that it would actively attack and destroy eggs, rather than fertilize them. The few children who were born successfully often aged to adulthood in weeks, then aged to death within months, their biological clocks spinning out of control. I met the last pregnant woman in North America, or at least the last one I ever encountered. She'd been carrying the same child for 6 years. It was alive. She could feel it moving, but it wouldn't be born. Ultrasounds, when we could jerry-rig them, showed that the child was fully developed, but was somehow existing in a different time stream than its mother. To the child, only minutes had passed. To the mother, years. She wondered if she'd die of old age before the child experienced enough time to be born. She wondered if the child would emerge into a world with no humans left to raise it. The animal mutations became increasingly bizarre without human intervention to cull the strangest variations. I encountered a pack of what had once been dogs, but were now something like living shadows that could only exist in darkness. Shine a light on them, and they'd simply cease to be until the darkness returned. There were birds with wings made of crystallized radiation that would shatter and regrow as they flew, leaving trails of radioactive glass shards. Insects that had become colonial organisms the size of buildings. Millions of individual bugs operating as single entities with distributed intelligence. But it was the plants that truly inherited the earth. Without humans to manage them, without vault agricultural knowledge to maintain crop genetics, they evolved in directions that defied understanding. Forests of carnivorous trees that would lure prey with pheromone fruit that smelled like cherished memories. Grasslands where each blade was a different species, all competing, all evolving in real time, changing so fast you could watch evolution happen. Flowers that bloomed only in radiation, their petals made of condensed light that would burn through anything organic. I found a place in Oregon where the plants had developed something like technology, vines that conducted electricity, trees that grew in circuit patterns, flowers that transmitted data through pollen. They were building something, a vast biological computer perhaps, but for what purpose I couldn't fathom. When I tried to take samples, the entire forest reacted, every plant turning toward me, and I heard something like music, or maybe screaming coming from everywhere and nowhere. I ran and never went back. The final revelation came to me in year 21, in a bunker I found in North Dakota. It was a Vault-Tec facility, but not a vault. It was their record storage, where they would have kept the data from all their vault experiments if the vaults had been built. But the computers were still running, somehow, powered by a geothermal tap that would last centuries. And in those computers, I found something that broke what was left of my mind. Simulations. Hundreds of thousands of simulations of what would happen if the vaults were never built. Vault-Tec had modeled it, planned for it, knew exactly what would occur. And there, in one of those simulations, was everything I'd experienced, every horror I'd witnessed, every mutation, every catastrophe, every extinction event. We weren't living in the real timeline. We were living in one of their projected failures, a model of what not to let happen. But here's the thing that haunts me. The simulations were interactive. They could be observed. And in the metadata, I found access logs. Someone had been watching us. Someone had been recording our suffering, our devolution, our extinction, learning from it, using our horror to perfect their own survival strategies. We were the control group for an experiment we didn't know we were part of, a cautionary tale being studied by observers we'd never see. If you've ever wondered what choice you would make in a situation like this, tell me in the comments. I'll be reading them. I'm dying now. The radiation from this leaking fusion core has finally overwhelmed even my ghoulified physiology. I can feel my consciousness fragmenting, my memories dissolving like sugar in rain. But I needed to record this. I needed someone, anyone to know that we could have survived. Should have survived. Would have survived if just a few decisions had been different. In the other timeline, the one where Vault-Tec existed, humanity emerges from the vault scarred, but not broken. They build the new California Republic. They establish trade routes and laws and art and music. They have heroes like the Vault Dweller and the Chosen One and the Lone Wanderer. They have hope. They have a future. They have stories worth telling and retelling. Legends that inspire. Histories that teach. In our timeline, we have nothing. We are nothing. We will leave nothing behind but radiation shadows and mysteries for whatever comes after us to puzzle over. No great rebuilding. No second chance. No redemption arc. Just a slow, grinding dissolution into extinction, watched by indifferent observers through computer screens in realities we can't reach. The terminal is failing now. The keys are melting under my fingers, fusing with my flesh in ways that don't hurt anymore because I've transcended pain. Or maybe I've just forgotten what not hurting feels like. It doesn't matter. Nothing matters. That's the real lesson of our timeline. Without the vaults, without that infrastructure of survival, nothing we did mattered. We were doomed from the moment the bombs fell, but maybe this recording will matter. Maybe someone will find it in this timeline or another. Maybe they'll understand what we lost, what we could have been, what we should have been, what we never got the chance to become. My name was Marcus Chen. I was a Vault-Tec contractor in the timeline that never was. I was nobody in the timeline that is. And soon, I'll be nothing in both. The screens are showing me something now. Other timelines, other outcomes. Infinite variations of October 23rd, 2077. In some, the vaults save everyone. In others, they save no one. But in most, they save just enough to matter. Just enough to make the difference between extinction and evolution. Between ending and beginning. Between nothing and something. We got nothing. We are nothing. We will return to nothing. This is Marcus Chen, or what's left of him, signing off from Timeline Zero, the control group, the cautionary tale, the road not taken. If vaults exist in your world, treasure them. They're not just shelters. They're the difference between a future and no future at all. The terminal is dying. I'm dying. Everything is dying. Everything has always been dying. We just didn't have vaults to slow it down. End recording. End everything. End.